Great. Thank you again for joining us. This webinar series was developed and is being presented by staff from the Evaluation Center at the University of Colorado, Denver. And this work is being funded by the STEPP program, State Tobacco Education Prevention Program at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I just want to mention that STEPP doesn't require you to create work and conduct a survey on your own, and that the purpose of these webinars is really to build you and your organization's capacity in evaluation. And we have two presenters today. My name is Erica Clark, and I'm an evaluation specialist here at the Evaluation Center. I've been here since last November, and before that I worked as a public health evaluator for about 9 years. And my colleague is Peter, and I'll let him say hello now.
Hi, my name is Peter Rumbach, and I'm also at the Evaluation Center. I'm an evaluation specialist and have been with the organization for 2 years.
So this is webinar number 2 of a series of 3 webinars on surveys. The TA content was developed and based on a needs assessment of STEPP grantees. And the webinars will be presented live on these dates shown and archived for viewing at other times. You may have participated in webinar 1 on survey development. If you missed it, you can still participate today, and you can watch the recordings of the webinars on our website, www.steppeval.org. We'll be setting new dates for the next 2 webinar series for September and January. After this webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to a brief feedback survey, and you'll be able to provide feedback on what days of the week generally work for you. And we love and appreciate your feedback, so please look out for that survey in your email. And we'll use this information in our planning for future webinars and to schedule new dates for these webinars. So we'll let you know as soon as we have dates for those. So today's goals. The webinar has 4 intended outcomes. Format a survey using best practices. Decide on using paper or online surveys. Learn from a pilot survey. And manage survey administration. So there are 7 best practices in survey formatting. Step 1, explain the purpose of the survey and level of privacy. You may remember from our first webinar in which we developed a survey to gather information about cookies, since everybody loves them. Step 1 is to clearly explain the purpose of the survey and the level of privacy of the data that they're sharing by participating in your survey. And here's a sample invitation. The first 2 sentences explain the purpose and how long it'll take for the respondent to complete it. Then there's a statement about the privacy level. In this case, it's a confidential survey. Confidentiality means that the evaluator is keeping it in confidence, not sharing responses by name. And if the survey asks any identifying information like age or ethnicity, it's likely that the survey is confidential and not anonymous. If you're using a web survey tool like SurveyMonkey and you use the send by email feature where you input names and email addresses, then your survey data is only confidential since it is technically possible to figure out which responses came from which email address. So something to think about there. A truly anonymous survey will not collect any demographic information at all, and there's not a way to link participant responses to individuals. Step 2 is to give directions before the respondent begins a survey. Here's a couple of examples on the screen. Directions for a web survey would likely be in an invitational email with the survey link. And for an in-person or a paper survey, you might have written directions at the top of the survey, or the survey administrator would be giving the directions verbally.
So the third step in survey formatting is to group like items together. And this means that organizing types of items in the same place on your survey. So if you'll remember from our first webinar, multiple choice items, grouping those together, matrix type questions, grouping those together, and check all that apply questions and grouping those together. It's also important to order scales in the same direction consistently throughout your survey. That is, if you're using a low to high rating, such as not helpful to very helpful, as is in this example, consistently order responses options for other items in the same direction. that is from negative to positive. The fourth step is to offer a softball item at the beginning of your survey. The goal is to have respondents engage. If the first question is off-putting, respondents might not begin the survey. A softball item requires little reflection or is easily answered by all respondents. If you have a softball item to open, respondents may skip sensitive items later if they've already begun the survey, but they are more likely to complete the survey rather than never to have begun. So an example of a softball item at the beginning of a cookie survey might be, what kinds of cookies do you like? Or an easy demographic question like, have you ever taken a baking class before? The fifth step is to place demographic questions at the end of your survey. Respondents can be put off by demographic questions, which can be personal, so consider their necessity before adding them and place these items at the end of the survey if it is decided they are necessary for analysis. This will limit the number of demographic items respondents are asked and allow them to complete all other parts of the survey first if they choose not to answer these questions. Step 6 is to make your survey visually appealing. Use clean, well-sized font that's easy to read. Use shaded linings for a matrix. This can help respondents keep track of which items he or she is answering. Also, try to limit the number of items per page. Make sure you preview it online to see if it's readable on various devices, including your mobile or tablet. So I want to show you an example of a matrix-style question that may be a little bit difficult for a respondent to reference a scale. It's preferable to allow the respondent to visually reference a scale when answering matrix items. In this example, you'll see that if the respondent was scrolling down by the time they were answering the items about sugar and eggs, they may not be able to see the scale at the top of the table, not essential to very essential. So an easy way to fix that is to add your scale to the middle of your table. Another option is to split the matrix into multiple tables and add page breaks between them, so that a respondent only sees one matrix per page with a similar number of items in each matrix. The seventh and final step in formatting your survey is to promote your survey in advance. So while this is not necessarily about formatting your instrument, it is an important administrative step before launching your survey. Giving respondents a heads up can help them understand what to expect, including the length of the survey, date of administration, the purpose of gathering this data, how the data will be used, and why it's important. It's also really nice to express appreciation for their participation.
Great. So deciding between paper versus online surveys. I'm going to go through some positives and negatives of both. Paper tends to result in higher response rates, especially if you have a captive audience, say, at a community meeting. Thinking about your target audience, paper may be a better choice for groups with less experience with technology or limited access to a computer. Some negatives to doing paper surveys include greater costs for printing, for the paper, for printing, and for mailing the survey. It takes more time, especially if the respondents have to mail the completed surveys back to you. And then there's more time at that end when you need to enter the data. So online surveys, some positives for using those would be that it eliminates the need for data entry and minimizes errors related to a person doing that. There are a lot of handy tools available with programs like SurveyMonkey where you can type in an individual email address, and then from the administrative side you can monitor who has opened the survey and send reminders to non-respondents. These systems all allow you to use advanced skip logic features that are not available in paper surveys. Skip logic are skip patterns that allow you to display a question when another question response is selected by the respondent. Skip patterns reduce error by displaying the question automatically, which in paper surveys can't be done so easily. These systems provide real-time analysis tools so you can track the progress of your survey. And some negatives to doing online surveys is survey fatigue. There are a lot of surveys out there, so it might be hard to make yours stand out. And you need to consider the formatting of your online survey so that respondents can complete it on their phone or tablet if they click on the link to your survey. Note that you can also use both paper and online to distribute your survey. For example, you could give it out at a community meeting and also create the survey online using one of these survey tools and send the link to other community members who didn't make it to the meeting, or you could post the link on a municipal website, so ways that you can increase your response rate using both.
Another important step prior to launching your survey is to pilot your instrument. So administer your survey to a small group in advance of full implementation. This small group should be similar to your target audience, but don't use actual participants that you want to include in your analysis. So for example, if your target population was students, you may consider a group of students who won't actually participate in the survey when you launch, but are similar in characteristic to the students that you want to survey eventually. Ideally, you would observe the administration and debrief the respondents after they complete the survey. So some things to look for as you're piloting your survey are any frustration, fatigue, or confusion, gathering the average length of time for completion, and piloting your survey on different formats. So if it's online, doing it on desktop, tablet, and phone. There are also some good questions that you can ask as you're conducting your debrief of your pilot. So were any questions not clear? This can help you to understand the literacy level of your survey, the wording of your items, or thinking back to the artisan ingredients example from our first webinar, were there any use of jargon that was difficult for respondents to understand? Additionally, were there any acronyms that were hard to understand? A second question would be, any questions that were difficult to answer? If so, why? So thinking about, is it possible that there were no appropriate response to the question, or that respondents couldn't remember or couldn't recall? Thinking back to our first webinar, remember it's important to activate recall in a respondent. And third, anything we didn't ask but we should have asked. So this is your chance to ask potential respondents if there were items that you didn't but should include in your instrument. Answer to these questions and your observations will hopefully uncover any mistakes you may have made and allow you to fix them before launching your survey. So some common survey mistakes. Number one, making your survey too long. Your goal is to have a high response rate to increase interpretability of your results. Making a survey too long may decrease your overall response rate. The second is having too many open-ended questions. Open-ended items are items that allow a respondent to write in a text answer. These items tend to take longer for respondents to complete and are more difficult to analyze on the back end. It is important to carefully consider the number and type of open-ended items you include on your survey. And third, too many demographic items. As we previously mentioned, it is not imperative to collect demographic data. It is important to understand how these data will be used in analysis and if collecting it is absolutely necessary.
These are some important questions to think about in advance. Thinking about your population, whether they're professionals, parents, students, when is the optimum time to administer your survey? If you're doing a paper survey, think about this undirected time and that you'll need supplies like pens, collection envelopes, and an administrator there to collect the completed surveys. If it's online, when will respondents be most likely to complete? Bad times are generally Mondays and Fridays and before a holiday. If online, will you be able to send reminders? If so, how and when? And how long will the survey be available? So in summary, after this webinar, you should now be able to Format a survey using best practices. Decide on paper or an online survey administration. Learn from a pilot survey. And manage your survey administration.
We just want to mention that this is the website, steppeval.org, where you can find further resources on surveys, as well as a community forum. Some resources that we posted for this particular webinar are an article on the adequacy of response rates, so you can learn a little bit more about the rates that you might need for a paper versus an online survey. As well as we posted a blog that features 7 online surveying platforms, some of which cost money and some of which are free. So if you don't have one that you like to use already, you can go on there and read a little bit more about some others. On this website, we also post past webinars and the slides that you've seen here, so you can access those. The community forum has a thread for each of the different webinars. So if you have a follow-up question to today's webinar that you didn't get answered, you can post it here and we'll be monitoring that to address any of those questions.
So webinar number 3 of this series will actually begin in a few minutes. If you are interested, then you should have already received the separate link for that webinar. And if you do not have the separate link right now, you can send me an email now and I'll send you the link. My email is erica.clark@ucdenver.edu. And we will be ending this meeting and take a few minutes break. And you'll need to find the link in your email for the next meeting. Although it's only 10:20, so we have a few minutes now that we can answer some questions, and you can use the group chat to do so.
All right, so it looks like there aren't any questions that anyone's typing. So if you do have questions that you remember after this, we are doing another webinar immediately following, so you can actually ask those questions after the next webinar as well. So we'll go ahead and take a little break, and then we'll be back on at 10:30. So thanks everybody for participating, and we'll talk to you in just a little bit.